Hey everyone, it's David Atkinson, your host of Cymatic Conversations. I'm here today with Paul Kiker from Kiker Wealth Management. Welcome, Paul.
Good morning, David. It's an honor to be here and have a conversation with you.
Likewise, great to see you again. And so, Paul, you and I met at the Peak Prosperity event last fall in New Hampshire. Great event, a lot of solid people there, and a lot of great conversation. And we've had a couple of subsequent meetings and conversations. And one of the things that at Cymatic Conversations that myself and co-host and co-author Nicole Connor are very focused on is we're really focused on helping people work through the rapid pace of change that we're seeing, certainly in the US and what's going on around the world. But that rapid pace of change often reveals opportunities, significant opportunities. And on the other side of it, it also offers tremendous opportunities to fail if you're not able to see things clearly and address what Nicole and I call blind spots. We've got a section on our Substack where we talk about blind spots and other things that are very relevant in the times that we're in. And what I'd like to do today, Paul, is you're a wealth manager. Would you take a second to share with our audience what you're about, where people can find your works, and what you're seeing in the world? A little background.
Okay. I appreciate that. That's one thing that I don't have a great elevator speech. I guess it's just part of my personality and being genuine.
Felt good.
But this is my 26th year of working with individual investors. Typically, somebody comes to me just because of where lifestyle is within 5 to 10 years of retirement. I have business owners and others that I work with as well, but we the area I'm in is mostly retirees. So for 26 years, I've seen what that last phase of life is like for people and how big a shift that is from their prior 40 years of working and accumulating capital to be able to retire 40, 45 years. So we're in North Georgia mountains, a little town called Jasper outside of Atlanta. Jasper was added to Metro Atlanta to get the Olympics in the late 1990s because we have no crime, had no crime essentially. It helped the statistics a little, but so our specialty is just a love of the truth and trying to overcome our emotional biases and run risk managed strategies that are adapted. Because there's economic cycles that occur throughout history. And most individuals have an investing lifestyle of around 20 to 40 years. And that's why we could repeat those mistakes of the Great Depression, the technology bubble. So our job is to help make sure people have income while they're alive to be able to live the lifestyle they want.
Outstanding. And part of the reason this podcast is called Cymatic Conversations is because the words matter. Like when you tell somebody you love them versus you hate them, there's a distinct difference in how that feels, certainly on the receiving side as well as on the
Yes.
sending side. So these cymatic conversations, they're all about, really speaking just brutally honest truths to your point and being very candid and honest with ourselves. And we've developed something called a resiliency code, which actually helps our subscribers and clients navigate that. One of the reasons you and I are collaborating is it's all about an attempt to do anything and everything that we can to create clarity so that we can provide the greatest guidance possible. And from a circumstantial perspective, what you're seeing in the marketplace, can you give our listeners just a quick update? What are you seeing in the market? I know gold's kind of like a yo going up and down. There's Trump and Musk are talking about auditing Fort Knox, which hasn't been audited since the mid 50s.
Yeah.
And you've got all this craziness going on. Can you give us an update on what you're seeing from a wealth management side and some of the things that you share with your clients, things to watch out for, and where do you think things may be going from at least an intelligent guess perspective?
Yes. So I am seeing things move at such a rapid pace that the average individual just cannot process what's actually taking place. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but Rolf the Belly has this wonderful book for those who love the truth and want to help overcome their blind spots. That's called The Art of Thinking Clearly. And of course, I've studied this book a lot over the years because it's so applicable to investing behavior. But what I'm seeing right now is there's a hindsight bias that people really want to hold on to the perception of what they thought the world was. And you've got some who are lovers of the truth that have understood that there's some issues going on in our government over time and that there's corruption there. And even they're shocked by what Doge is finding. And what I'm finding is there's a division that's developing. And I've noticed this over the past couple of weeks, which is really surprising to me. So the bottom line is what I'll state here is I believe this is the most dangerous time for investors that I've seen in my 26-year career. And outside of studying history, I'm not so sure that it's as dangerous as the 1929 period. Now, that's not a projection or a prediction that we're going to have another Great Depression and things are going to come apart. We don't know how this is going to unfold. But there's a belief that the government's going to bail everything out, that they can continue to bail everything out. So people are just wanting to cover their eyes. They're wanting to stick their fingers in their ears. Not all people, but a substantial number of people right now are choosing not to see the truth of what's unfolding. And I'm seeing a lot of undercurrents in the market that are telling us that things are dangerous. I believe this is a very dangerous time in the markets. Now we go to gold, we're seeing things that have never happened in history. I cannot find another time where you're seeing just this massive movement of gold that's taking place. And that's in spite of the fact that people believe that Bitcoin has been the answer, right? And one of the surprising things over the past couple of weeks that I've seen is just Bitcoin have this big sell-off when everybody believed that Trump's positive Bitcoin. Maybe he is, but we're not seeing the price action take place in sectors of the market that are matching the biases that investors have, right? I'm concerned that we are in a topping process in the markets. And that's one of the things actually for about an hour, me and Dylan, which Dylan's on the investment committee here at the office, is just having conversations about making sure we can see the truth of what's taking place and setting our own biases aside, because this is not a time to anticipate and predict what you think is going to take place. Now, in 26 years of doing this, I can take good educated guesses as how the market's going to unfold, but the market never does exactly what you think it's going to do. And we may be early. I tend to be early in seeing things, and I've learned that over time. But just trying to make sure we're eyes wide open, having conversations with clients, prepare them for what we're anticipating that could unfold over the next 12 months. More than any other time in my career, I'm seeing people frozen. I would say 30% of the population is just ridiculously shocked by what's taking place. They knew it, but still the truth is scary. David, that's one of the things that investors struggle with is just a love of the truth. And we can blind ourselves by not having the courage to embrace the truth of what's really taking place. Then there's about 30% of the people that are just amazed as what's taking place and they don't know how to process that right now. And then there's another, I think, 30% of the population who's just refusing to accept any truth whatsoever because they've been so propagandized. So there may be a little bit of truth in all of those sectors, but that's what I'm seeing. And I believe this is one of the most dangerous times that I've seen in 26-year career, because it's going to matter to get this right. Most investors believe that passive investing is the best way to go. I'm a big believer that you should be a long-term investor, but there's nothing about being passive in all aspects of our life that can have applicable wisdom outside of a market that has been bailed out by the Federal Reserve and bailed out by ridiculous fiscal spending over all this period of time. And I think what we're starting to see is those big institutions are realizing that the rules of the game have changed. So we always have to shift when the government takes away free markets. And I've been saying for the past, really since 2008, you have to play the game by the rules that are forced upon you. And those rules are changing, it appears, based on this administration, because I think they really understand the big picture that the U.S. is bankrupt if we continue down this path. And the first thing the definition of insanity says, keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results means you're insane. So all this money printing has hoarded the wealth into the top 10%. They feel bulletproof, while the large majority of the population is struggling. They're disenfranchised. Jordan Peterson talks about younger kids and drug addictions, just demoralization. And I think Martinson has talked about that too.
Yes.
So it looks like the rules of the game are changing. It's a dangerous time.
It is a dangerous time, and one of the reasons we're so focused on blind spots is because, and I certainly know in my 50 plus years of life that whenever we have a blind spot that we're not consciously aware of, or we don't have someone around us that's covering our flank, if you will. It's always fascinated me why celebrities usually have a handful of people around them. And one of the things that I've come to discover is there's usually one or two close friends or lifelong childhood friends around them that make them feel good, keep them grounded, and make them laugh, whatever else it might be. But then there's always the one or two others that are in the entourage around them, and those are the ones that are covering the blind spots. And it's always fascinated me, and I have seen it time and time again in real life. And here's why that's important. To your point, Paul, things are changing so rapidly, and we're living in perilous times for those that are not being honest with themselves. It is really what it boils down to. And so the name of the game is, if you're able to identify and address your blind spots, humans learn best through failure. And one of the best things that we can do is, if blind spots, depending on how large they are, really dictate the size of a failure in your life, right? Whether it's marrying someone that you didn't anticipate was not going to work out, and you spend 15 years, you invest 15 years of your life, that's a pretty big blind spot. And so the name of the game is finding and fixing those blind spots as early as you can in life, and failing small and failing fast. And what happens is you inherently build your level of resiliency to the point where it's not a reaction then, right? It's a response, and it's a proactive, it's a very intentional response that allows you to keep your momentum, and you really don't fail back, you fail forward. And that's the name of the game with the blind spots. That's why we put such an emphasis on them. And in times like these, I'm fascinated with history. And one of the statistics that I'm always fascinated by, because I follow the markets and love economics and the whole nine yards, a couple of points that I'd like to share is, first of all, I came to understand that there was more wealth and millionaires generated during the Great Depression than any other time in US history, and for other points in history.
Hmm.
And that's a fact, right? That's a statistical fact. And there were also a lot of wealthy individuals that thought they were in the catbird seat, but they were out of position and they actually lost everything. So very
Hmm.
interesting dynamic. And I feel there's a lot of rhyming going on, as you inferred here, with this time in history versus the 20s and early 30s. Now, that said, the other thing, historical fact that I'm very familiar with, and I'm sure you are, is the fact that when empires, the US is an empire, it's a global empire,
Right.
you just got to call it what it is. When empires get overburdened with debt, and this is historically proven hundreds of times in human history, 100% of the time, they print the currency until it goes to zero. And it's funny, I look at the characteristics of presidents and their strengths and their weaknesses, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the strengths that is ironic about Donald Trump is he's the king of bankruptcy. And so I, I find it ironic that he's sitting at the helm of the United States when we're on the precipice of such a precarious financial condition. Uh,
Yes.
And it just,
Yes.
it makes you wonder. And you're like, is he going to oversee the bankruptcy of the United States? And why are they focusing on the gold? And look, that's not, and look here, the other thing is, being brutally honest with each other doesn't mean it's doom and gloom. In fact, an incredibly valuable revelation that I've had in recent years is we often refer to people in the world as, oh, they see the glass half full or, oh, they see the glass half empty. One of the things that I've learned by utilizing the resiliency code and as myself and co-author have developed and utilized it, refined it, one of the things I've come to understand is the power of neutrality.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean waving a Swiss flag and saying, oh, I'm neutral. No, it means actually embodying and acting. And the reason it matters is that when you're operating from a neutral position, think of it as being, okay, you got a glass and it's half full of water. When you're operating from a position of neutrality, you're actually sitting at the halfway point of the glass. And what it allows you to do is it actually allows you to look the empty route or the empty path as well as the full path. So you get a full spectrum of clarity and observation. You're not looking at a biased side of the glass. Incredibly powerful in terms of being able to really see things for what they are. And given we do live in the precarious times that we do, one of the most one of the most powerful things that you can do in your life is to make the adjustments necessary so that you can see with clarity. So as people come and go in your life, you can very quickly flush out and understand that person's being authentic. That one's not. Here's who I'm going to invest my time with. Here's who I'm not, etc. Because it's those relationships and such. Look, we're not going to get through this individually. We're going to get through whatever tumultuous times we have in front of us. We're going to get through them as collaborators, whether it's at the
Yes.
community level or family level, whatever it might be. And I know you're seeing this in your clients. They're struggling with the generational gaps and being able to communicate with one another. Technology is it's a beautiful thing, but it can also be a very detrimental thing if it's not utilized correctly. And so
Absolutely.
we've got some generational challenges to deal with. Can you share with our listeners and audience what you're seeing from a generational perspective?
I sure will. I'm just making some notes here just to make sure I stay in the direction. So the challenge is generationally. We're in a society now that we get into these feedback loops and like minded. Now, that's a good thing in a lot of ways. But if you completely connect yourself with like minded individuals, then you're living in what's called confirmation bias because you always have this feedback loop that gives you a picture of what the world is. Okay. Same thing happens within families and dynamics. So this is a very challenging time in a lot of ways. The baby boomer generation has a really hard time understanding the kids in their 20s and 30s, and that's causing a lot of friction across the board. And I'm seeing a lot of arrogance, a lot of confirmation bias. So one of the things that I'm seeing is this rift that is developing between the generations. You've got the baby boomers that because of their biases don't realize the fact that they came through America in the golden age. You came out of college with very little debt, homes were affordable. Yes, interest rates were really high in the early 1980s, but payments on homes were still affordable. And then with the US leaving the gold standard in 1971, I believe it was
71.
under
Yep.
Nixon, initially inflation seems really good. Okay. People, because price of things, assets are going up. Baby boomers were accumulating a lot of assets. So they're telling their kids, you need to go invest into real estate. You need to do all these things. You need to do what worked for them. But there were certain economic forces that made things a lot easier for them. And because there were really hard times during the Great Depression, that created really good individuals that loved the truth and they walked with a little bit of fear and trembling. The baby boomers come through and they go, if my parents had had more, been willing to take on more debt, then they could have had more money but they're still shocked about what they accumulated over time. So the baby boomers are in that part of the cycle where things were really good. And the younger generations, are disenfranchised, disheartened. They don't have the opportunities that the baby boomers did. Going back to the early 1990s, you could buy a rental property and the rent would pay for that building in around 7 years. But you go buy a rental property now, and even as high as rents are, because asset prices are so high, you're talking 25, 30 years by the time you have vacancies and repairs and upkeep. The mathematics just don't work as good. So that's one aspect of the generational issues that we're seeing. More so than anything, I'm seeing a lack of teaching of the next generation. And one thing that we see in the wealth management business is that accumulated wealth rarely makes it beyond 3 generations. And a lot of that has to do with initially, I've seen business owners that have accumulated massive amounts of wealth in their time. They came from poor families and had the character and the drive, right place, right time. A lot of our success is being in the right place at the right time. And they built these big businesses. They took care of their employees, but they didn't spend a lot of time with the next generation necessarily teaching them. They threw money at them as a benefit of where they were. Now, that kid has a little bit better understanding in that second generation than what the third generation does, but the business owner built it out of the first generation, built it out of character and pursuit, trying to offer a good product, took care of their employees. The next generation doesn't have the confidence that's there. By the time the third generation comes along, their identity becomes the wealth that they have, and they're pursuing this image to everyone that's around. And that hollows out the core of that foundation. And they don't have the wisdom that has been developed through the challenging times that the original founder went through to understand really how to manage money. So there's so many dynamics right now, and there's a lack of understanding. And I think a lot of the division between the baby boomers and those in their 20s and 30s has to do that neither one can understand the perspective they're coming from. The environment the baby boomers came up in was full of massive opportunity. Don't get me wrong, there's opportunity today, but there's not as much opportunity today as there was in the 80s because stock markets basically went sideways from 1967 to 1982. So that built the foundation to where things could expand from. On top of that, we had left the gold standard. And then that inflation, you can track back a lot of things of where we are today that started in the 70s. That inflation helped those asset prices. So it bailed out foolish mistakes of the baby boomer generation because house prices were being pushed based off asset prices were being pushed based off the inflation behind. Now we got to this point where everybody believes that it truly is different, whether they're stating it or not. And what breaks my heart the most when I start working with families is just the lack of willingness to speak truth to the younger generation and the lack of willingness to hear truth from the younger generation. And I believe the only way families can do well over time is to really have a love for the truth and realize, hey, I may have a lot of resources and my initial desire, like the Bible tells us, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. So if I have more resources, is your kid going to grow up and choose a career for money on what they can make? Or are they going to choose a career based on what they're good at? And the money is a result of them being excellent at what they do. So I'm a big believer that you can run a kid by giving them a higher lifestyle when they're young, because what else do you give them to look for down the road? Because I have seen money being thrown at the younger generation can destroy their drive because that becomes their image instead of raising kids to be resilient. My belief is you have to raise kids with the character traits in a controlled environment and lay discipline upon them in a controlled environment so that they'll learn that there are consequences to negative actions, but there are also consequences to positive actions. And if God's given us the wisdom to be able to raise our children the right way, by the time they're 20, 21, 22, boys tend to it takes them a little longer to get over Fool's Hill sometimes. But that you could blindfold them, take everything except for the clothes on their back, drop them on the street corner of any city around the world. Now, granted, there are places they wouldn't survive if they were there, but you understand the heart of what I'm saying. and that they could survive on their own and be able to be self-sufficient. And I believe that's more important now to teach the next generation that than anything, because money can make you comfortable. Money can shield you from some things, but it can't make you happy. It can't build character and integrity. And only character and integrity is what will survive the test.
Absolutely. And Paul, the reason we call it the Resiliency Code is there is a legitimate code that myself and co-author have cracked that leads through adjustments and identifying thing that leads you to what we call unshakable resilience, being very brutally honest across generations, being very realistic with yourself. And actually what it does is it fosters collaboration. One of the biggest gaps that we see right now are gaps in collaboration. There's all this fragmentation and broken homes and just broken generational expectations and the like. And you cannot be resilient. You're not able to achieve maximum resiliency on your own. You can achieve a level of resiliency. The gray hair and the hair loss that we share is not because we did it perfectly. It's because we learned those hard lessons and are doing everything that we can to convey that not only to our clients, but certainly to our subscribers that are listening, the younger generations that are out there, in an effort to help them realign and catch up. Because if we're not able to do that, the fact of the matter is a lot of people are going to get left behind, and we're going to go through a very hard reset of things as we navigate whatever financial challenges and economic challenges and social challenges that we have in front of us. So all that being said, I'm I did a post this morning, Paul, and it's called Chase. And I'm most active on LinkedIn and Substack. But that post was all about recent conversations that I've had with, it could be business partners, it can be just acquaintances, business affiliations, family, whoever it might be. And the common theme that I see out there is everybody's chasing. They're so busy chasing. And what I'm finding is, as the more hindsight I get and the deeper I get into the application of the resiliency code and collaborating with bright minds like yourself and the Chris Martinsons of the world and others, is what I see is that one of the most important things that we can do is actually take a step back and just pause and really take stock in, am I looking at things properly? Am I being honest? Am I being accepting and loyal and trustworthy of myself, and looking at things properly so that I can go out and take the necessary steps, prepare in the right way, and then engage in relationships and other things in a meaningful way that actually provides value to everyone involved. This chase is
Yes.
it's a very unbalanced situation. There's extreme winners, there's extreme losers, and it's just not healthy in general. So what are some of the things that you're doing with your clients and your colleagues and associates? What are some of the things that you're recommending that they do? There's great books and there's other things out there, but what are some of the things that people can tangibly do to begin to right the ship in there and navigate these very treacherous waters ahead?
That's a really good question. So I'm going to follow up on what you were talking about earlier. The glass half empty. Well, they remember all of the past and they assume that's going to continue in the future. So what I believe people should do right now to recenter themselves is to slow down and actually take time to think. Assume that you're being manipulated and pushed through propaganda in every single way. So one of the things that I constantly harp on my children about, especially my oldest, he's a commercial builder. He's doing really good. Is now is the time to build your war chest for when things get tough. Okay. There's a time to where you need to focus on the present and absolutely embrace courage to accept the truth and the reality of the situation. This is a point where you have to consider where you want to be in the future, but you have to be willing to let go of that. The Bible tells us a point: if you want to find your life, you'll lose it. And if you want to lose your life, hold on to it. Now, I'm butchering that completely, but that's the spirit of what it's trying to tell us. There's a lot of wisdom in that. So, the one thing that I recommend people do to anchor themselves where they are right now is you really need to take a hard look at the future. So, this is what we do for individuals when they come in their first meeting is I take all of their assets, their income needs, their life expectancy, and I stretch that out to 92, because what would be more miserable than living to 92, thinking you're going to pass away at 80, but you used up all your income by the time you were 8, right? We got to have some runway left over at the end of our life to make sure, because we don't know what time and how long we're going to live. There's no guarantee. If we knew we were going to die next week, we could spend everything frivolously now. If we knew we were going to live, if we believed we were going to live to 110 and we gave up too much in the short run. But you got to love the truth on where it is, and you have to really think. So I would encourage people that, hey, there are lessons that we learned in the past. And I'm a big believer. There's a scripture that says that God doesn't allow anything meant for your evil. He doesn't waste evil intentions. So if something horrible happens in your life, there is a lesson that you learned in there that will prepare you for something in the future. There's a lesson in there that can help you share wisdom to help someone else. And I think we're in a society too where everybody wants to take. Okay. I tell every client, you have to think about what's being presented to you. If it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. You have to embrace the courage to go back and say, what if we had a Great Depression? Okay. You made a good point about Trump being the king of bankruptcy. So what if there's two ways that we get out of the situation we're in as a country? We can hyperinflate currency, which is what happened in the past. We can look back at the Roman Empire and they started diluting their coins, right? They started diluting them. That's the same thing that printing money does, is you're expanding your money supply by diluting the purity of those coins. That is dishonest. It is truly dishonest. What our government's doing now is, instead of expecting people to suffer the consequences of foolish decisions, let's just print all of this money and kick that can down the road a little bit longer. The German hyperinflation is an equal opportunity punisher of individuals. Now, one of my biggest concerns is I believe that they're going to print, I believe the path of least resistance in their mind is they're going to print us into oblivion. Because as Americans, we remember the pain of the Great Depression. Germans remember the pain of the Weimar hyperinflation. So, so if everybody believes that they're going to print us into oblivion, what if they can't, right? Because at the end of the German hyperinflation, as soon as reality set in, their stock market dropped 90%. That was deflationary. So high inflation ultimately leads to deflation of the economy side. The only thing that you could hope for, pull that parachute to reposition your assets at a good enough time to where you're going to survive on the other side of that. But on the other side of that hyperinflation, we have to be prepared, and we don't know how this is going to unfold. But I believe, and this is not a recommendation of those that are out there, that you have to have some exposure to gold. Do you bet everything on that gold? Absolutely not, because now you're speculating. You have to diversify in this circumstance. The second thing is take stock of where you are. Have the courage to slow down to where you are in the present. If you're working, you're struggling to make ends meet. Your greed is keeping you in your investments that are doing really good because you feel you're behind your brother-in-law, or you feel you're behind what's presented to you on television. These are all manipulation tactics that somebody else will use, not your brother-in-law necessarily, but marketing companies will use to get money out of your pocket for their own benefit. So let go of what your picture of the world is and examine where you are with truth, with courage and reality, and focus yourself on reality. Say, where am I right now? Not where I want to be, but where am I now? What happens if we get this outcome to where we have a Great Depression, where you have a deflationary bust and the price of everything goes down dramatically, and the government doesn't come in and print a whole bunch of money. One thing that I can't get beyond is, and I've just been thinking about this, let's say I'm a government leader. For those of you who aren't familiar with David Rogers' Webb, Chris Martinson's work on the Great Taking, the risk is, what if we did have a full system collapse? What if the government prints enough money to backstop FDIC and SIPC? Now you're going to wrestle the funds out of the top 10, 20%, but 70% of the population that doesn't have a whole lot, if they're covered by those FDIC insurance because they just don't have enough assets to be above it, they're going to secretly be glad of the fact that these people that have been lording it over them have lost a little bit. But now you got about 70% of the population that's not going to be pulling you out of your political offices and dragging you through the street. So I believe this is a time that you have to analyze multiple outcomes and have the courage to at least consider, what if we go this way? Okay, if we have a deflationary bust, what if I take some profits and I've got 24 months worth of my expenses and savings? Now I'm more resilient than 70% of the population that can't make it more than 30 days without being in big trouble and begging for help from somebody. Okay. In that case, if hyperinflation ensues, those assets are going to lose purchasing power, but that's a sacrifice you have to make as far as having some insurance and resiliency against a deflationary bust. If you take 10% of your assets and you buy physical gold and you categorize that asset as insurance against a hyperinflationary event, okay, I would hope, and I hope on the assets that I have in gold, 10 years from now, it's the same price that it is today. I really hope that. Now, I'm not excited about that because I've had a dead asset for 10 years, but at least I have that asset value. But think of it like this. If you own a home, you own property and casualty insurance. The average home in America, let's say approximately you're going to be spending $3,000 a year, 2,000. I don't know what these numbers are because Georgia's expensive on homeowners insurance and a few other things. But let's say you're spending $3,000 a year over a 10-year period of time. You spent $30,000 that you don't get back. But at the end of that 10-year period of time, you don't say, I'm so upset that my house didn't burn down because I wasted this money on insurance. In insurance, we understand the risk reward overlay. As investors, we need to look at our money and examine the outcome and have a little insurance against however this unfolds. Gold can do that. Short-term treasuries and money market can do that. And that builds resiliency on however things unfold. And what I spend a lot of time doing for clients and talking to them about most likely outcomes, and then 20% worse than what I think it would be. So I'm looking at this wide range of potential outcomes. And the reason I believe that exercise is important and taking the time to think about that is if we break off in one direction and it's relatively clear that we're building momentum there, whether it's deflation or hyperinflation, if you're 2 steps ahead of the average individual, then that's the difference between your family coming through in a resilient manner versus a deer being in the headlights that's frozen, that can't process what's taking place and loses its life because of it. So to answer that question again, just in summary, with a very long-winded answer, please do forgive me for that, is to take stock of where you are and force yourself to think through the outcomes that you don't believe will happen. Take some wisdom from the pessimist and consider the path that they're presenting. Take some wisdom from the optimist and consider the path that they're presenting. But focus on the present, live in the present, and then build some mental steps. I actually go through and write them down. I go through and write down. I've been back and studied the Great Depression and said, and looked at those who survived and thrived on the other side of it. What did they do different than the largest majority of the population? Okay. How would that look in today's society? So that was one that I poured myself into. Another that I poured myself into was the German hyperinflation. Read journals, and there's all kinds of information out there if you go back and look at it. What did those individuals that survived and thrived through that period do? And how can I apply that in today's society and implement those strategies, and then that wide range in between. So I'm pointing to extreme areas and then working through. Go back to the 1970s. What happened during the stagflation we had in the 1970s? How did those people thrive during that period of time? What did the people that got wiped out do different? That is the single most important thing that I believe an individual can do right now is slow down. Things are moving so fast. Choose, and it's a choice to embrace that courage, to embrace the truth and the reality of your situation. Lay down your hopes and dreams, lay down your hopes and fears, and as objectively as you can, weigh where you are, which will help you find your strengths, help you find your weaknesses, and then spend time maximizing your strengths no matter what unfolds in the future, and focus on being more resilient in your weaknesses. And if you can, take those weaknesses away, weaknesses in regards to your ability to navigate the future well.
Take it 100%. And Paul, a couple things come to mind as you were laying that out. So, do you know the latest numbers on the cash stockpile that Warren Buffett is sitting on?
Yes, I do. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it's the largest stockpile percentage wise, and it's the largest dollar wise, but he has more money now than he's ever had. What I focus on is the percentage of those assets, and it's
Yeah.
broken every historical record from where he is. And I read everything Buffett. So
And it's hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And you and I both know that he's not sitting on those funds in accounts for no good reason. He's sitting there because
right.
he's seeing instabilities and uncertainties, and he's making sure that a good percentage of what he has and what he's managing for his clients is there and positioned in such a way where he can readily access the liquidity and go out and make acquisitions or just be in a resilient position so that regardless of how it changes, he's able to adjust and adapt accordingly. But if you're outstretched and have a tremendous amount of debt and are over leveraged and just making emotionally driven, very blind spot oriented decisions, that's potentially life altering. And so the name of the game
It is,
is
it will be live.
will be life altering. So as you said, the name of the game is having some dry powder and really one of the greatest investments that you can make right now is actually just to pause. The first book and the first core element of our resiliency code book is to pause. Just take a pause, take stock of what's going on so that you can then position yourself accordingly. And I would argue, based on what you've shared, and I'm sure what you've seen with your historical analysis, much of what the people in Germany experienced, and even the people in the Great Depression and 70s stagflation, much of what they experienced was happenstance. There was no planning that went into their lives or forethought. If anything, it's a extremely small percentage of rarity. Most of it was happenstance. People just happened to be in a decent position at the time, had some liquidity that when things did deflate, they could go out and acquire assets. So the one of the greatest lessons that we can learn is, hey, look, we still have a relatively calm and stable environment that we're in right now. Take stock of that and appreciate it for what it is, and take the opportunity to. But it requires, like you said, it requires choices, it requires action, and requires courage. And look, take that pause, take those steps, go out and work with respectable, reliable people like yourself and others that we know to go out and get positioned accordingly. We're not saying brace for impact, but we're saying brace for stormy weather.
I have no doubt that we're going to have stormy weather. Now, does that end up in a crash of the system? We have no way of knowing, right? You got to
Yep.
get into that stormy weather before something comes apart. There are periods of time, if we're in grizzly country alone, then that's much more dangerous than being in grizzly country with a group and some ability to protect yourself. So there are times where that herd mentality and being in a herd in a community, and I believe that one of the things that causes us to struggle in society today is lack of community, which makes it easier for us to be manipulated. But when investing in a lot of things in our life, and especially today, I think a blind spot for most people is that herd mentality that Rolf DeBelly talks about, which we could call social proof. Now, I love just the wisdom that's in the Bible over generations. So, like in Exodus 23:2, it says, do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. Okay. So, if we connect that together, that scripture and what Rolf DeBelly is warning us and our known human biases is a clear warning against blindly following others. This applies to investors jumping into bubbles or panics just because the masses are doing it. Discernment is key. And sometimes we're caught up in that without really realizing that we're caught up. So I like the points that you were making there and just focusing on where you are now and slowing down.
Yeah. And actually reading the signposts. Part of the disadvantage in chasing is not stopping to look at the signpost. What if one of the signs says, hey, you need to stop because the bridge is out, right? By the time you get to it, it's too late. One of the greatest pieces of advice that I believe we could convey at this point is, hey, just take a second to pause, have a conversation, right? Reach out to us and let's just have a simple conversation. And let's talk about our given situations and help each other navigate. I spoke about collaboration earlier. And again, Paul, grateful for your time here and wisdom. Wisdom is so essential nowadays. And I can only encourage our younger generations to reach out and engage. Those of us that are willing to convey and commit our time to that education and helping make good decisions. And everybody's circumstances is different, certainly, but there are some generalities that we can convey that are absolutely going to improve their resiliency to the point where they're going to weather the storm far better than others.
Yeah.
But just that little bit of effort, because you and I both know it doesn't take a lot. It really doesn't.
It doesn't take a lot. And going back to Buffett, Buffett has the willingness to separate himself from the herd because he's focused on reality and truth and in the present instead of hoping to where we could be. We set our mind and intention on where we want to go. Your subconscious will direct you in an area, but if you really focus on embracing the truth and loving the truth, then your subconscious is going to help you find the truth. And the truth will stand over time no matter what. Lie runs around the world and it sounds good and it's like eating chocolate all the time. It's great in the short run, but the results that you get if you're eating chocolate 24 hours a day are not good from a long-term standpoint. So one thing I would encourage a lot of the listeners that are hungering for wisdom, wisdom is out there. One of the ways the book of Proverbs explains it is wisdom standing on the street corner, screaming out, listen to me. If we set our minds to love wisdom and find that sustainable path from a long-term standpoint, then we're going to get there. And there's fables throughout time, the turtle versus the hare, right? The hare has all kinds of talent in the world and it takes that talent for granted. And the turtle doesn't quite have the talent, but it just plugs along and keeps moving and keep doing the right thing and keep going in the right direction. So one thing I would encourage everyone, any listener that's out there, if you've never read the book of Proverbs, read it again. It's timeless wisdom that is so applicable at various times in our life that is applicable today. And more than anything, it sets your mind for truth, wisdom, reality, and resiliency. Just a warning, the prudent foresee danger and hide themselves while the simple pass on and are judged for it. And the one thing that I can tell you is when everybody believes that a certain path is going to occur in the future, that tends to be as investing, everybody's on the same side of the boat. And then there's the boat tips at that point and they don't get the outcome that they thought that they would. And that's the challenge as investors in today's society, period of time in the past when information was valuable. And don't get me wrong, information is valuable. But in the 1930s, 40s, if you could get information that other people didn't have, that gave you a massive advantage. In today's society, information is everywhere. Okay. It is everywhere. We are overloaded with information. In my belief, the most important trait in today's society is to have the wisdom, which is based on a love of the truth and a love of reality and a love of being resilient, have the wisdom to understand what information is applicable and what information isn't. Because just because you have information doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna lead to the future. I can have all the information that I have an uncle that went back and bought massive numbers, say massive, a large number of rental properties in the 1990s when the rental income would pay for the property in 7 years. That's great information. But if I just assume my uncle did it, so therefore I need to go buy a bunch of rental properties today. If you're not looking for the wisdom to say, okay, that was a different time, asset prices were underpriced. You've been through a real estate calamity that came through in the 1970s. And by the time the early 1990s were there in that recession, nobody was chasing asset prices. Today, if you go buy those rental properties, it's 30 years to pay off. That's great if you buy it when you're 20, but people don't have the revenue or the assets to buy it at 20. They're doing it when they're in their 40s and 50s and 60s. And then they think that this is going to be an answer because the information they have about somebody else in a completely different circumstance worked for them. This is not an environment where it'll necessarily work for you. So you have to really look at the full picture and setting your mind to determine wisdom to discern the information that's important for where you are today is one thing that will get us all through the future with a few bumps and bruises instead of a few lost limbs.
Certainly. And one thing that I continually come back to is regardless of if you're Christian or denomination, whatever religion you might be, there's wise words in all of those books. And one of the things that we can confidently say is there's tremendous similarities, especially when we talk about certain sections of those books that are very much the same. And it's because much of the experiences that are documented in those old wise books is from circumstances that were calamitous to human beings, right? And they were all learning experiences that were very emotionally charged and aggressively documented because they knew it must persevere time and it must be carried on for thousands of years. So the references are much appreciated, Paul.
Well, and
Yeah.
and one last item to state, they love the next generation enough to tell them the truth, to build them, to try to warn them to not make the same mistakes that they did in the past. So I think that's why those have stood the test of time is because they're applicable through all of the cycles, generational cycles that we go through. And those who survived the Great Depression never touched debt for the rest of their life. The next generation thought that was foolish and treated debt like they're holding a rattlesnake. And then the generation after that has no fear of the debt that comes along. And that's why you have these 70 to 100-year cycles because it's generations that completely miss it. And I even see that there's not that many people that have been in the industry for 26 years anymore. Even Dylan that works for me, Dylan's unbelievably good at the asset management side. I'm so excited that he's on the team, but he's never experienced a 2000 or a 2008. So my job has been to teach him so that he didn't make the same mistakes that I had to learn the hard way. But I also tell him, I was explaining this morning, my job is to get him through the next major bear market without so many scars that it distorts his view of the world on the other side. There's nothing better we can do for our families and our community and our society and our nation than to teach and point to wisdom so that their lives are a little bit easier than ours. Not throwing money at them, but giving them the wisdom to be able to navigate whether they have lots of money or whether they have very little money, because a lot of that's going to be outside their control.
Yeah. And do it with mutual respect that it requires mutual respect and appreciation on this side and a desire to actually convey it on the other. And when those come together, you and I both know, Paul, when those come together, that's a superpower from a
Yep.
generational and a family perspective. And I don't know about you, but I have a tremendous desire to be remembered beyond great grandfather David,
It's-
because today people know their great grandfather, great grandmother's names, but they have no idea beyond that what happened generationally. So we're doing everything that we can to make sure that it does persist beyond three. And been such a pleasure to speak with you today, Paul, as always, and grateful for the time today on the podcast, you sharing your wisdom with our listeners, and such a great conversation. Can you remind our audience one more time where they can reach you and what you can do to help them navigate this process?
Yes, absolutely. So if anybody's interested in talking to us, you can go to kikerwealth.com, and that's Kiker. It's an interesting last name. There's not that many of us. You go to kikerwealth.com. We're in the middle of updating the website. Those are some of the things that I'm behind on. We took team pictures yesterday. But if you want to reach out, that'll get to Mackenzie will get us on the schedule with one of our advisors. And the first thing that we do in that situation is we're going to analyze your situation based on your retirement probabilities. We're going to take the reality of where you are right now, your goals and objectives. And then we're going to go back and use actual history starting at 1926 to stress test an unknown future. So there's two types of programs in the industry: Monte Carlo analysis, which has its own biases. I have discovered in working with retirees for 26 years, actual history does a better job of showing economic cycles and stress testing. So that's the first thing that we do. There's no charge for that. It's free consultation. Once we get through all that, if that's it, then I've given you information that's going to make you a more aware investor of where you are now, more resilient for the future, because now you're armed with the reality of your situation. And then beyond that, if somebody wants to talk a little further, we run risk managed strategies that are designed. Nobody can pick the top of the market. Nobody can pick the bottom of the market, but to be adaptable in a world where as things are changing, we considered what that possible outcome could be. And hopefully we're two steps ahead of the average person. And that can be the difference in major calamities. Because the thing is, I do this, I'm an optimist at heart because I believe that when the system resets, however that reset takes place, is those who are prepared for it had the courage to analyze their situation and make sure they're in a position to take advantage of opportunity, that that they'll have funds available to invest when there's opportunity. So the reason that we run risk managed strategies is if you lower your risk in 2007, early 2008, you're willing to take a step back or step out of the game for a minute just to observe when risk is high. Well, you have cash available to survive the loss of a job, and if you can get through that, be in a position to turn that into a generational opportunity. I believe that we're going to have those generational opportunities at some point in the next 2 to 3 years, and everything that we do is designed to help mitigate that risk as things come apart. There are times where we're going to help point out the options that are available to you to maximize your probability of success in the future. So that's what we do, and would be honored to talk to anybody who might see some value.
Very good, Paul. Thank you. And our listeners can reach us and find our works out at the resiliencycode.substack.com. Don't hesitate to reach out, comment, subscribe. If you like this content, please let us know. And if there's anything that we missed or that you'd like to see, please absolutely comment. And we'll make sure to get you in touch with Paul if you have interest there, or any of the other fascinating guests that we have on the show. Again, Paul, thanks for a tremendous conversation, and enjoy your weekend coming up.
Thank you, David. You as well. And it's always an honor. I look forward to the times we get a chance to talk.
Same here. Take care, Paul.